Everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub on this, well, hopefully sunny Wednesday for everyone. If you guys are watching us live, if you're not watching us live, it may or may not be Wednesday. I tell them every week, Chuck, and I have yet to get like a whole bunch of folks laughing at it in the comments. At some point, I will go get the last. We'll go introduce or reintroduce Chuck in just a minute. But if you guys are new to Manufacturing Hub, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you guys are new on the Manufacturing Hub side, every Wednesday, Vlad and myself, Dave, we go and have conversations with other practitioners in the space about different topics. I'm super excited to go introduce Chuck and continue on this conversation. Previously, we had Chuck on Bill on episode 128, which is just a fantastic episode. We were reminiscing about some of the interesting conversations we had and the applications. We've got another fun application that we're going to talk about this week, and super excited to do that. Before we go ahead and introduce Chuck and let him go kind of share how he has either done great things or terrible things to find himself live on the show with us today. One note, in a couple of weeks, we are at Automate, and Vlad and myself in Manufacturing Hub, we will be at Automate. Super excited for that. Chicago 22nd through 24th. On that Wednesday, I believe it's the 23rd, we will be at the Horner Automation booth, which is booth 4303. You don't have to remember that. We'll go ahead and drop it in the notes, and you guys can go find us. You guys can go find us throughout all of that. If you guys have any thoughts, questions for, well, hopefully Chuck, but also for Vlad or myself, feel free to go ahead and drop them in the chat. We will do our very best to go get to those. If we don't get to all of them, or a bunch of them are particularly technical on applications, we'll do our very best to go get to them after the show. But without further ado, everyone officially welcome to Manufacturing Hub. My name is Dave. This guy up here is Vlad. We'd like to welcome Chuck back on. Chuck, welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's good to be back. I had a lot of fun the first time, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Absolutely, Chuck. Thank you so much for taking the time. Before we get into the more technical part of this conversation, could you give us a bit of a reintroduction for those that have not maybe seen episode 128? I know it's been a while. How did you get started in the industrial automation and manufacturing space? What was your career trajectory like? And ultimately explain to us a little bit more what it is that you are doing today.
Sure. So, I grew up in Michigan, like every Michigan engineer, it feels like. I started in the automotive industry, of course, like we all do up there. And I went to engineering school. I'm an electrical engineer by degree. The first 5 years of my career were spent really as an intern, if you will, at an automotive plant. So it wasn't just engineering, it was learning the ropes of production and maintenance and all that kind of good stuff, which really gave me a good baseline for my automation career. After those 4 or 5 years were up, I spent a couple years as a field applications engineer working on PLCs in automotive plants. So again, that was where I really dove into the automation industry the first time. And then for the last 36 years, I have been at Horner Automation, where over the course of my career, I have done everything from applications to product management. And these days, I'm kind of more of a brand ambassador, a technical brand ambassador for Horner. I spend most of my time doing YouTube videos on industry topics, doing industry-related training. Also, of course, training folks on how Horner products work, as well as how to interface Horner products with products from other manufacturers. So for those who aren't familiar with Horner, should I kind of go into that now a little bit?
I will say, Chuck, if I may make a comment, right? So I think you're underselling the amount of tutorials and the quality of the tutorials that you have posted over the years.
Okay.
And I think I've sent you that message, right? So I was on the flight back from Hanover, and I'm involved in a large project where an ASI bus is being deployed, and I found your videos on not only, at a surface level what it is, but ultimately diving quite deep on how to set different addresses, right? And for those who want to learn more about the protocol, it is not something that you would see in a lot of applications, but it certainly does get utilized for specific, at least in my experience, food and bev applications, and has its place. And you have a very extensive set of videos on that site. So I downloaded them on my iPad to watch offline on the flight back. So really appreciate that, right? Again, I think that without mentioning any names, a lot of vendors will just typically pitch their product and just make a very short video. But you guys have very extensive, right? It's an hour hour plus long videos explaining the protocol. So again, I would not undersell those.
Yeah, I mean, really what we're trying to do, again, what we're trying to do, in addition, of course, to get our name out there for the types of products that Horner sells. And just for those, I'm not going to get too commercial here, but we make PLC type products. We do make those, right? So those are very popular. What we're best known for are all-in-one controllers. Yes, I have props. It's got a screen, but it's a full PLC with built-in I/O and all that kind of good stuff. So, but again, we're not Rockwell, we're not Siemens. So our products need to play nice in the industrial space with all kinds of other manufacturers and different applications with different networks. And as an application engineer, which is really what I've been for a good part of my career, I know the type of information that I need when I'm trying a new technology out. And I want to know not only how to hook it up, but I need to know more detail so that I can troubleshoot it. At some point, something's going to go wrong and I need to be able to troubleshoot it. So yes, a topical ABC is good, but you need more depth than that. So to give folks at least a place they can go for the information if they need to bone up on it a little bit further. So I take those videos really seriously because really I'm an application engineer, and that's at heart, at least. And that's what, you know, a lot of the folks watching these videos are.
I certainly truly appreciate it, right? Like I said, I think it's difficult to find information in our space, and specifically very in-depth information where it's not just higher level, how do we just get started on this, but really how do we configure to the protocol level and explanation of, you know, bitwise operations. It is truly appreciated, Chuck. Let me ask you a follow-up question on the background side, right? So you made the switch from the automotive industry. I assume you worked for an end user to working for an OEM, right? And I, to be transparent with you, have always been curious about that transition. I have certainly, you know, explored some options, let's call it, with a few OEMs that create controls hardware and software in our space. So I'm curious, maybe looking back, what sold you on making that decision? And maybe could you elaborate a bit on the differences, you know, being an application engineer at a plant versus your day-to-day now at Horner?
Right. So when you're an application engineer at the plant, one thing that's always true is you have to work with what you've got, right? So whatever the equipment that's been installed, whatever the equipment that's running, whatever you need to do to get it back up and running or to expand its capabilities, you have to work with what you've got. That's the biggest thing at a end user level, right? You're not going to implement a firmware change on your own. You're not going to go in and change the guts of the product. Whatever feature set that product has, you need to figure out how to make that product do what you need it to do. So that's the background for me, at least. That's the way I look at an end user type application engineer, right? Your job is to do what you can with what you've been given. When you work for the manufacturer, OEM, as you're calling us, now it's a little more complex, right? Now you're not only helping your customers do what they need to do with what you're giving them already, but you're there to listen to what it is that they're trying to do that maybe is too difficult right now and shouldn't be that difficult, or maybe a feature that you just don't support at all, or maybe an application you just can't solve. So you're taking all that feedback in, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to, one, of course, help the customer to start with, but then you're trying to really feed that information into your engineering team and your management team to try and help them make decisions on what is it we need to do practically to make this easier to use? What are we missing that we really need to focus on? Those sorts of things. So you're not only looking at what is capable today, but what do we need to be capable tomorrow? So that's a really big difference between the end user level and the OEM level, for sure.
Let me ask you one last follow-up on that side before I pass the mic to Dave, so to speak. Again, I'm curious on that career progression, right? I'm assuming that before you can manage or influence at least some decisions on the product, you need to understand what's currently in place. You need to understand the end user, but you also need to understand where the market is going, right? Could you maybe expand on those three dynamics a little bit? And again, maybe talk about some of the early days as you had to go into that role from the end user to Horner. How was that maybe like in the first few years?
Sure. So it was really, first of all, when I worked for the end user, I was a young engineer. I was working with what I had available. I was pretty green. And when I first worked for a manufacturer, my eyes were like open, like, oh my gosh, anything is possible. right? Yes, I understand how things work today, but anything is possible. So there's multiple places you get your information when you try and feeding that up. One, of course, is you're getting it to the people you're talking to on the phone. I started out as an application engineer, so tech support was part of my responsibilities. I'd go out in the field and visit real applications. I took that all in from actual customers. But sometimes you can get tunnel vision by doing that, because it might be whoever called today is at the top of your mind as to what you need to improve, right? And you have to have a much broader view than that. And that's kind of where you were talking about, where do you get all your market information? So when I moved up from an application side of things, from an application engineer to a product manager, now it was my job not only to take the information from the customers coming up from below, which is below, they're not lower than us, but you get my drift, that are coming in that way, and also to take a look at the market in general. And there's a lot of ways to get market information. Talking to customers is always the best one. Talking to a variety of customers in different industries is right there too. But also talking to colleagues at other automation companies, reading back in those days, reading the publications that were available in different markets and in the automation industry. You just had to spend a good portion of your time looking at what was going on in automation to try and get a feel for, in general, where are things headed and where does our company need to go. That being said, the company I work for and have worked for 36 years is a privately held company, and our owner, Phil Horner, is a visionary. That guy is always got his eye on the market. So the reality at Horner has always been that while we have a ton of contributors at our company, the prime visionary is Phil Horner. And anybody who's met Phil know he's a very personable guy. He's customer oriented, and he's our visionary. So a lot of my career, frankly, has been spent kind of validating and helping to implement Phil's vision.
It's super interesting, right? And the comment I'll make, like I said before I pass it over to Dave, is that, I hear a lot of general, I would say, feedback from the end users and general manufacturers. And in many ways, engineers always want more, and they're expecting the platform to be covering all protocols, be very open to other, I would say, like platforms, be very inclusive of protocols that are very recent, but also, those from 30, 40 years ago. And I think it is very difficult from even a strategy standpoint for you to align, which verticals do we pursue? Do we pursue building management? Do we pursue, even oil and gas versus food and bev? Because again, the requirements are so vastly different. But when you have that specific vertical expertise, it's very easy, I think, to criticize a control system that needs to satisfy all of these requirements. But yes, it's super interesting to me. Like I said, I've never worked for a manufacturer myself, but I always think in the back of my head what must be transpiring as far as the conversations go. Yeah. Dave, what are your thoughts?
I love that story, Chuck. I think you told kind of a similar story with your work at Horner Automation and kind of Phil being a visionary the last time you were on. And I can't think of like a more fun, interesting, but also potentially like extremely stressful place to be that small group like Horner is, of trying to service all of the gaps within the industry, but then also trying to figure out, this is where we are today, and we need to know when it's time, to move into the future, or what step is left, what step is right. Obviously, you and Phil and Horner Automation in general have done a fantastic job of continuing to stay up to date with what the market is desiring over the last at least 36 years and however many years before. Phil was doing that. So I love that. I want to go get into industrial networking protocols, and Vlad had talked about, you and Vlad had talked about it a little bit. But before we do that, I want to go touch on a slightly more time-sensitive manner of Automate, right? So Horner will be back at Automate. Your smiling face, Chuck, will be back at Automate. What can we expect from Horner Automation at Automate? Who should go find you guys?
Sure. So anybody who uses PLCs in any form or function should take a look at our booth, because I know in the PLC industry, we've got a couple of giants that are excellent companies in Siemens and Rockwell, and there's lots of other great players as well. But sometimes I think as automation engineers, we don't always realize what all is available in the market. And one thing that did happen with the whole COVID mess that was a few years ago is I think a lot of companies had to use some equipment that they didn't really want to use, but that was the only thing they could get. And so I think these days companies are more open to looking at different alternatives for PLCs, among other types of components. So at Automate, we're going to be showing some really fun stuff. So one of the technologies I think we're going to talk about a little bit later on. One of the things we've done is I mentioned the fact, a minute ago that, what we often specialize in are these single components that do the PLC and the screen in one piece. Well, we've applied some automotive technology for touchscreen displays so that we can now separate those components, but they still program like they're one component. So that is a really cool thing we're going to be showing off. It's a technology we called HMI Connect, where you program a PLC like you traditionally would, except right there in the same program is all your screen graphics and all your HMI development. Everything else is in one program, all running on one piece of hardware. And then your touchscreen is just literally, it's a component connected with a single cable that's literally just a touchscreen. There's no setup, there's no configuration, none of that stuff. Nobody else in automation is doing that. So that is something, even as somebody who doesn't think they're interested in Horner per se, that's something they should take a look at, because that's the only place you're going to find it in the industrial automation space is in the Horner booth. So that's one thing we're showing. Another thing we're showing, again, I have props, is we have a new low-end PLC, if you will. So this guy is, you can think of it like a micro PLC, but these days, every time we release a new PLC, we think of it as not only are we releasing a PLC, but we're releasing an edge device. Because let's face it, what machine these days doesn't need to push their data to the cloud, right? So this is a full PLC. It's got a little display on it that you can do some local operator interface stuff on and all that kind of good stuff. Has a nice selection of I/O and all that. But it's also got all the Ethernet connectivity you could want. It's even got Wi-Fi built in. And you can use it as an edge device. You can use it as a PLC. You can use it as both. So that's a pretty cool product. And we're talking about a component that costs in the $300 price range. It has 18 I/O built into it. So that's a pretty disruptive product that we're going to be showing off for the first time at Automate. And then related to our discussions on field bus protocols, although this is, I guess, a new one as field bus protocols go, even though we've been supporting Ethernet IP forever, but as a I/O device, not as a device that controls the network, our OEM customers told us that, Horner, we like the fact we can hang your products on an existing Ethernet IP network, but if we want you to control a machine that's already got a bunch of Ethernet IP devices on it, we don't want to swap those devices out because Horner doesn't do Ethernet IP scanner. So we're showing off our new Ethernet IP scanner capability in our controller. So we can, so our OEMs that have Ethernet IP devices on their network, they can just swap out the controller and go the Horner direction. Those are the
that is a lot of fun. I'm over here thinking I'm very excited to listen to probably Vlad monologue several dozen questions about both the HMI Connect and also the new PLC. I forget the name that you said, Chuck.
I didn't say the name. That's why you don't remember it. It's the CPU 151. What a sexy name.
Okay, I like it. I'm in fact not even sure that I need to be there for it. Right? Like I feel like I would just get in the way between you and Vlad and the hardware for that. But no, I love that.
If you're more of a software guy, let me jump in real quick. If you're more of a software guy, we'll also be showing off our OCS 360 cloud service with all kinds of great capabilities. So maybe that's more up your alley.
No, I like it. I guess I like the hardware, Chuck. I especially like your comments with kind of like the single connection between the now split HMI and PLC. I personally love that. I love reducing the configuration and the amount of cords that just is in my life personally. But you can probably see, and all of our viewers can see, Vlad's props behind him. He owns at least a couple dozen more PLCs than I do, and has them with him at any point in time. I'm over here thinking to myself, I am very low on props comparative to everyone else. I am underpropped for this episode. So that is fantastic. I'm excited to get into that. Listeners, stay tuned. We will be getting into, I'm going to say, all of those topics and more with Chuck more in depth while we're at Automate. Again, if you guys are going to physically be there, come check out booth 4303. Vlad and I are going to be there Wednesday morning as we're having these conversations. So come say hi. Maybe you guys can ask some questions on camera. If you can arm wrestle Vlad and win him and win a couple of opportunities to go ask questions. So that is fantastic. Thank you for that, Chuck. I want to go talk about some of these industrial networking protocols. So you mentioned that a large part of what you're doing now is kind of focused on the education side, kind of focused about talking about what all that is. And Vlad brought it up as we were talking. You have created a gigantic Horner YouTube channel talking very much about the industrial networking protocols. I think you and he said a lot of them are an hour or more longer. For the chat, we'll go drop that YouTube in there so you guys can watch. And for the listeners at home on the show notes, we'll also go ahead and put that in there. I guess take us through that process. Take us through some of the protocols.
Sure.
I think you had mentioned that you have formerly been an applications engineer, and your goal is to kind of create those videos and those educational pieces to go answer questions that other application engineers are going to have, hopefully as they're learning about things, but realistically at, I don't know, 11:30 to 1 in the evening to 1:30 in the morning, as you're pulling your last pieces of hair out, desperately trying to figure out why something isn't working. So take us down that path, please, Chuck.
Sure. So, first of all, let me talk a little bit about my background in industrial protocols and networking. I mean, for the last 25 years at Horner, we've been really focused on our PLC type products, which are extremely popular with OEMs. But the first 10 years at Horner, we were primarily a third-party I/O module developer for GE Fanuc PLCs back in those days. So in the 90s, for most of you are too young to know that, but in the 90s, most PLC manufacturers had a primary development partner for low volume, high specialty type modules. Okay, they didn't make everything in their line. And we were that development company for GE Fanuc, whose products that remain now are branded as Emerson. But our role back then was to make specialty I/O modules. And this was in the dawn of the field bus days. They called it the field bus wars, actually. So before Ethernet, because Ethernet is not trustworthy for the factory floor. It's not deterministic. You should have heard Rockwell expound on that fact for about 5 or 6 years until, of course, Ethernet IP came out, but that's another subject. But anyway, so we're talking back in the days of DeviceNet, SDS, for those of you who can remember that, Interbus S, Profibus, Can Open, which, and some of these are still around, of course, right? And there's others as well. I'm sure there's others. So we did all these protocols for because GE and other manufacturers didn't know which one was going to win, right? So our job was to do all these protocol modules and then get them out there in the market and then see what happens, right? So I spent a good part of those 10 years diving into all these different communication protocols, having to hook them up, make them work, figure out how they worked, all that sort of thing. So I feel like, and that's before Ethernet even, and then we had a whole new set of Ethernet protocols that came along after that. So I feel like I've got a background of somebody who's been in that seat of having to get everything working. Because as our engineering team was developing this stuff, I was the guy that had to hook it up and make it all work, whether it was in a plant or, in our demo room or whatever. So I feel like I know the type of information that's needed, and I really try and get that into the videos. So when we're covering something, especially that's general market, like Ethernet IP or Modbus TCP or BACnet IP or OSI or one of these other protocols, I feel like I can provide at least a good start for the information somebody's going to need to really get up on what this is all about.
Chuck, let me ask you a follow-up question on that front, right? And for a little bit of context, right? So when I graduated from university, my original intent was to go into embedded systems, right? I had not known about manufacturing and the industrial automation space. And so with that in mind, I had at some point considered the idea, after having gained the experience of the industrial space, what would it take to build out, basically converters of different protocols? Because again, I still think there's a lot of pain points. I still think there's opportunities, but I guess I'm curious to learn from you, because you've gone gone down that path, what does it take to basically implement a protocol compliance for one of your hardware modules, whether that's a PLC or a converter or otherwise? Because again, I started reading some of the standards, started reaching out to basically the entities that support said protocol, and it is a lot more challenging than I originally anticipated. It is not just an open source spec and here's,
Right.
a Python library or C++ library or even assembly library for that matter. So maybe could you paint us a deeper picture of what does it take to take that protocol and actually implement it into your hardware?
Sure. So, of course, I'm not one of the development engineers that's doing that, but I've worked with them for 30 years plus. And I mean, it really varies, right? So back in the early days, a lot of it was writing code from scratch. There was from the firmware side of things, because there weren't established libraries. There was a spec sheet. There was this is the specification for DeviceNet. Here's the specification. That's developed first. And then any libraries you might be able to use to implement that are going to be years later, right? So if you want to be early in that technology, you're taking the specification and that's what you're working from. So in the early days, that's what it was all about. But this is 2026. This is not 1995 or 1992. So now there are all kinds of different, some open source stuff is available. You have to ask yourself, do you really want to implement that? And maybe the answer is yes. Oftentimes it is, but many times it's not. And then there's also other companies that specialize in protocol stacks, right? So they have developed the stack to the specification. They guarantee-ish that their stack will pass all the conformance tests and all that sort of thing. And so usually you're going to partner, usually, not always, you're going to partner with a company like that, and you're going to license their stack, and they're going to help you to a certain extent to get through the approvals process and that sort of thing. But you're not paying them, a couple grand. What they have is valuable information, right? So it's expensive. So you have to think twice about the investment required, not only in man hours, but for development purposes, but also in, stacks and tools and all that kind of stuff. So these days, there's more than ever tools available for you to add something into your product. But you have to choose which path you want to take. Do you want to go the open source route, if it's even an option? Or do you want to write it yourself from scratch? Sometimes that's an option. Or do you want to work with a third party to license a stack or something like that? So that's kind of the three different areas.
Super interesting. I would make a side note, right? If you ever make a video that is, again, I think this would be a very long conversation, because again, I am curious on what it takes. Again, as a hobbyist, at least at this stage, right? I'm not planning to release my own PLC or hardware or otherwise. But what does it take to implement? Again, you've mentioned DeviceNet. Probably now it's going to be Ethernet IP, right? But if you wanted to make just like an I/O module, let's say, that is compliant with Ethernet IP, for which you can insert the PLC of choice to pull in the data from, like, what does it actually take? I would certainly be appreciative of a longer form video and you explaining that process. But let me, I guess, like you've met. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, the one thing that people don't consider when it comes to, do I make my, because we talk to OEMs is our business, right? OEM machine builders. And some of them build their own stuff. Okay. Some of them have embedded products as part of their standard machine, right? So they're making a make or buy decision every day, or at least every time the decision comes around again. And the thing they got to remember is the whole obsolescence and the whole maintenance issue. That is the biggest thing that trips people up. Yeah, you can find you can hire an engineer to build a product for you that meets the specifications and all that. But then what about 2 years from now, when that chip goes obsolete, or when they've changed the spec, or when suddenly you need new features and now you've got to redesign it? So it's usually those sorts of things that trip companies up, not just what it takes to get a product into the market the first time.
Yeah, and you've certainly seen a lot of more of those nuances, than myself and Dave have. So I think it would be interesting to get your perspective for sure. Like I said, I'd have tons of questions, but let's move on to a few other things before we run out of time. I wanted to ask you, you've mentioned this a little bit earlier, right? That Ethernet Ethernet was not deterministic at the time, which was one of the reasons as to why it wasn't utilized, right? And so I started my career in 2013, and I've had a lot of conversations and subsequently removed a lot of DeviceNet and ControlNet from different plants for the reason as to why, Ethernet IP took its place. But could you maybe ask or elaborate on the more general question as to why you've seen certain protocols be implemented in our space, but also made obsolete to an extent, right? I'm really curious about that history as well.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, I mean, there were in the beginnings of this field bus implementation in the industry, there were probably not dozens, but it seemed that way. There were all kinds of different protocols that were in contention to be the main ones that people would use. And then, of course, things transitioned to Ethernet. People finally, again, in industry, we don't implement any technology immediately. We always have to trust it first. So it took a while for Ethernet to come along and to be trusted enough to actually be the basis of most of the protocols. And that's where we're at today. But for the most part, most of the protocols that have been implemented are perfectly capable protocols. You could run. There are tens of thousands of machines that use Interbus S. Okay, that was invented by Phoenix. Perfectly fine protocol. Okay, nothing wrong with that. And so you've got machines all over the place using all different protocols. But in terms of which ones ultimately become the ones that are the standards, if you will, or the most prevalently used, that's turned out mostly to be a commercial issue. In the early days, everybody was extolling, here are the technical reasons why our protocol / network / implementation is the best. And you can argue over different levels of superiority, but in reality, most of them were perfectly fine technically. It's really the commercial aspect of things that drives what people use. So today, it's mostly in the market. You see protocols from Siemens and from Rockwell. Yeah, they're not private protocols. They're run by third parties. And of course, EtherCAT's also very popular. That one, I think, is probably the one protocol that I would say has been more on a technical merit than necessarily a commercial might, if you will. And I'm not knocking Ethernet IP or Profinet. Those are perfectly capable, good implementations that people can use. But they didn't win because they were technically superior. They won because of who was backing them. And EtherCAT is a very good technical implementation that has been successful because of that, in my opinion.
Let me ask you one last difficult question before I pass it over to Dave. I'm curious as to do you see any convergence of protocols, right? We always discuss in our space, well, maybe we should standardize, maybe we should migrate over to the same protocol, right? End users typically prefer to have a specific standard, not only for the control system, right, but also more and more so on the network side, right? Even from an engineering standpoint, I think once you've learned, let's call it Ethernet IP or Profinet or Profibus or what have you, it's easier to just have that, let's say, in your mind as opposed to an array of a few dozen different protocols. Are you seeing the industry ever converging, or do you really think it's forever going to be at least a dozen and there's just no moving away from that because of, as you mentioned, maybe the players in our space?
I think it's, I talk to I have my own opinion, and I also talk to our R&D manager, Ken Janata Jr., who's another one of my longtime colleagues who also keeps an eye on the market along with Phil and myself. But we really don't think it's going to narrow down any further than it has, right? I mean, I think there are plenty of good, and it's not dozens today. Yeah, technically there are dozens out there. But the reality is there's the big 4-ish protocols out there that people use, and that's pretty much where we're going to be for a while. There will be new ones that emerge and that sort of thing, but it's not going to really it's not going to dwindle down to any fewer choices, if you will. There'll be some new technologies emerge, but it's probably not going to dwindle down any further than that. I don't think so, anyway.
Gotcha. Appreciate it.
And in terms of conversion, there's two different ways you can talk about conversion. Is a company willing to convert from one protocol to another, or does a company have to have conversion of data and information in a single machine? Both of those are potential issues, right? So the reason why, as an application engineer, you might stick with one protocol is if everything's available for that protocol, I never have to worry about any other protocol. The reality is, as an applications engineer, at some point in your career, they're going to ask you to integrate some piece of gear that doesn't talk the network that you're the most familiar with. So you better be prepared to figure out how to make those devices talk to each other. And that's just a reality of being an application engineer, where not every piece of gear has every protocol developed for it. So you can see our videos on YouTube to help with those, hopefully.
I was going to say traumatic flashbacks to my time as an applications engineer there, Chuck.
What is this? And what am I supposed to do with it?
Yes, please go invent this protocol converter and just make it magically work on these things that we've been building for the last, 20 years. Having said that, I think that it was really interesting that the comment that Vlad brought up about building hardware, right? And to me, I'm always very impressed when I see groups like Horner go out and be able to release and continue to release hardware, especially kind of to the smaller to mid-size market, because I guess I more so in the last 7 to 10 years have seen, I guess I've personally seen a couple. I have been on the periphery of probably 3 to 5 different groups who all thought that they wanted to go build their own hardware for some reason. Some of that was inclusive of just going and white labeling hardware. And I think each and every single one of them lost at least $1 million before they just kind of gave up and they went and they found something else that they could go through the process to white label. So I guess I just wanted to go bring up that for any of the listeners at home who are like, yes, that would go be a lot of fun. Chuck talking about all of that work and what happens when chips become obsolete and all of that doesn't dissuade me. It is a very expensive process. I don't particularly know anyone that has done it for an inexpensive number. And even some of the very, very smart people I know who have gone down that path have all invested and basically lost hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, because it's just a very difficult thing to do.
And one thing we try and do, right? This is a role we try and play in the market. Another role we try and play in the market, besides supplying OEMs with, great off-the-shelf products, is we try and utilize our, 40 plus years of electronics development experience in the industrial space to help OEMs that are looking, they're making those buy or build decisions, and try and say, hey, we've got all this experience. We know how to do it. We're small enough and nimble enough. We're willing to work with you to tweak our product to meet exactly what you need. Now, we can't do that for everybody, but that's the conversations we love to have with OEM customers, is what can we do to tweak our off-the-shelf products to give you something that you can almost consider custom. So that's a role that we definitely want to play in the market, and we do play that way. We have to be careful, though, because we can't do everything for everybody. But it's a conversation we want to have with as many people as possible.
No, I think that's an interesting conversation. I imagine we will see. I feel like every couple of years there's a new generation of people that come up and they're like, yes, this is what we want to go do. And so if I can in any way, shape, or form dissuade you guys from saying, I want to go pick the chip and go from chip all the way up and do all of my own prototyping in that, it is a very expensive, time-consuming process. And so I like that, Chuck. You should be concerned or wary, because Vlad, I'm sure, has several ideas of some hardware that see, Vlad just went and printed some PCB board rulers.
Nice.
And so he's ready to get down to the board level.
I've been experimenting a little bit, but for now it's just for fun.
Yeah, it's a great hobby.
Absolutely. I love that. So Chuck, going and kind of wrapping up the conversation about the industrial networking protocols, are there any highlights in your mind of videos or other things that you've done? Is it some of the EtherCAT? Is it some of the kind of older 10, 15 plus year protocols? Any highlights worth sharing with the listeners?
First of all, let me say, as a graybeard, I think that about the newest protocols are probably 25 years old, frankly, at least the ones that are currently commercially successful. There's been variations and they've been updated and all that. So there's really not a whole lot of quote unquote new protocol wise in the industrial space. But in general, what I try and do is I try and, for instance, the videos that are probably our most popular on our channel are going to be, how does Modbus TCP work? How does BACnet IP work? That's a protocol in the building automation industry. That one's very popular. You know, and then comparing Ethernet IP and Modbus TCP. Those sorts of videos are the ones that are the most popular. We don't get into all the oldies because I'll be honest with you, these days, it's not that often that, I mean, Vlad has taken out a lot of the control net and the device net, so there's hardly any of that left anymore. So I haven't really gone into a lot of the really old ones. I did get into CAN open because CAN open is still a perfectly viable protocol. Is it growing like crazy? No, but it's viable and it's out there. So there's that level, but most of them are going to be on protocols that are really still around and are still, you know, being implemented.
Okay, no, that's fantastic. We have a question from Nico in the chat, specifically about protocols. He is putting you a little bit on the spot, but saying if a company or an OEM is moving forward with technologies that are emerging, so like AVGs, high-speed motion, things along that line, it seems to him that EtherCAT and Profinet
probably.
Is the best solution over Ethernet IP. I guess, do you have any comments or thoughts on high-speed motion and the best between EtherCAT, Profinet, and Ethernet IP?
Sure. So I would say that just as a purely third-party independent engineer, from what I have been exposed to, the protocols I have been the most impressed by in the regard that he's requesting have been EtherCAT and Profinet IRT for that sort of application. Okay. Because those are, you know, sub-millisecond type protocols that don't use standard Ethernet anymore, right? I mean, the PLC can be running a standard Ethernet chip, but all the devices connected as, I guess, slaves, if you want to use that antiquated term, can't use standard Ethernet. So, but in terms of the protocol itself, I've been the most impressed by EtherCAT and Profinet IRT for that sort of application. Now, a lion's share of applications don't need either of the capabilities that those protocols offer, but for that particular application, that would be my recommendation. And yes, Ethernet IP is a good protocol, but it wouldn't be my first choice necessarily for the question he asked.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I guess, Vlad, you look like you have some comments. Do you have comments about the protocols for Nico?
Well, I would say it's an interesting question, right? So I did quite a bit of motion earlier in my career, and a lot of it was on, again, because of the Rockwell's presence inside of those large manufacturers, was on Circos, right? Which then later transitioned into Ethernet IP and SIP motion. But I'm assuming, and again, I have not dug very deep because it's a proprietary implementation or wrapper on top of Ethernet IP. Obviously, I do not know how it compares to EtherCAT, but I think that's probably where I would look for. I have not used, you mentioned the variation of Profinet. What was it, Chuck? I
think it's called IRT. Again,
IRT.
It's just it's basically a specialized version of Profinet that uses special Ethernet implementation so that it can get the specifications. And let me say, Vlad, that I had not considered that, you know, that Circos variant that you described. So that's I'm sure very capable.
It's been to an extent made obsolete, right? So you get a lot of those drives. So it used to be over fiber optic, hence the reason why it was, I would say, a lot faster than the, I guess, previously available protocols. But I also did a lot of retrofits from, like I said, Circos over to the newer drives that utilize Ethernet IP. And since then, I've done a lot less motion in a general sense. But again, I know that motion is very difficult for like the high-speed applications, especially when you have more drives than a single PLC can. So now you're starting to synchronize across like different control systems. So for me, it would be difficult to answer. I haven't dug deep enough, I guess, to understand Nico's application. But I'm assuming every vendor and every protocol has a high-speed variant, so to speak, right?
And again, I want to be clear that my answer was about the protocols I've been the most impressed with. I don't have firsthand experience with any of those in that sort of an application. So take it with a grain of salt.
Gotcha.
Absolutely. Go ahead,
Chuck,
Vlad.
I do wanna talk about the application you've alluded to a little bit earlier, right?
Mhm.
Which is used, I would say, at least for me, in a non-traditional sense, in a
Right.
non-manufacturing environment. And
Yep.
for the reason that you've mentioned a little bit again, because you can separate the components,
Mhm.
which are, your PLC and HMI, and
Right.
basically transmit data via a specific protocol. Could you explain to us what that application is, but
Sure.
also what does it take from a technical standpoint to implement something of that nature?
Right. Okay. So we at Horner, we run into a lot of cool applications, a lot of fun applications, a lot of hard applications, and we've got a lot of great OEM partners. And we have one that's in the mobile industry. They actually are a world-class manufacturer of ambulances and fire trucks and other emergency vehicles and all kinds of peripheral equipment for those. And what they have done is they partnered with us, and not in everything they make, but in a lot of what they make, they kind of used repackaged versions of our standard circuits and standard controllers in these really critical applications. And of course, a majority of what they were using from us were products that were the control and the IO part, right? They weren't using a lot on the screen side of things. So as we supplied them with hardware, repackaged hardware that they designed into these applications, we included, for video purposes, we included a display port. Now, display port is a computer technology. It's not HDMI, but it's a computer technology, and one of the options for you to plug in monitors. But the problem with implementing that in a mobile environment, especially, is you really can't find the appropriate cabling that's rugged enough and all those sorts of things. Plus, it just didn't work very well. So we were looking for a different technology to supply the screens, because if you've got a fire truck or an ambulance, you've got screens you're going to have to put throughout the vehicle to operate certain things. So we worked along with our partner, and our R&D manager came up with something called FPD Link, which is a technology that's used in the automotive industry to connect many times the glass in your dash, for instance. We've all got all kinds of glass in our dashboard with the electronics that drive it. They don't have the electronics directly plastered to the back of the screens a lot of times. And this technology basically is a serialization that takes these video signals, which are normally considered parallel signals, and it serializes them into a 2 gigahertz signal that's run over a cable. And the beauty of this approach is it also allows other signals to ride along with it. So if you have a touch screen, okay, you not only need, of course, the video on your screen, but you need the touch feedback to go back the other direction. And also, it sure would be handy if we could carry power over that same cable as well. So what we've implemented with this OEM partner, and now is available in our standard product line, is this FPD Link technology, which allows us to take a product like this, which is a traditional PLC, and let me get another prop here, and connect this touchscreen, right? Looks like a nice ruggedized touchscreen, but all that you have on the back is this one connection for power, video, and touch, and then a variety of ways to mount this guy, in whatever environment you might have. So that's FPD Link technology, and we're the only ones that are doing that. I know I alluded to that in our discussion about the trade show coming up, but it's a great way of keeping all your project in one file running on one piece of gear, your PLC, and then having that HMI located pretty much where you need it. We can go, without repeaters, we can go up to 7 meters, which isn't bad. And with repeaters, you can then, of course, double that. And you can have multiple displays on the same CPU. So at the trade show, at Automate, we're going to be showing 3 15-inch displays, all talking back to one PLC. And all the programming is with the first display. The other displays, there's no programming or anything else. So it's pretty cool.
Chuck, let me ask you a couple of questions, right? So in a traditional sense, right, obviously I have not dug into the HDMI or, display port, or even, I would say, just the standard AVI, maybe connectors. You cannot send data over them besides, what's displayed on the screen, right? You cannot have a touch screen that is only connected via an HDMI cable and you send the coordinates of your touches, right? That shouldn't be possible.
I think for the most part, it's going to require a USB cable for the touch part of it, and a video cable for the video part of it. I think for the most part, that's it. Now, these days, there are so many laptops that have touchscreens built into them that there might be, one of our viewers might be able to chime in on something, but there might be a technology now that allows that. But if it is, it's recent.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen any factory that does like a separate screen from the control system without using some kind of just a mouse, you know, on the IPC that is running
Right.
the application, right? So then you
Right.
have obviously the input, and the operator can then use a click, but the touch screen does not necessarily connect back to the controller. So that's, again, I think that's super interesting. Second question, right? So this FPD link specifically, right? So I know that the car manufacturers have their own sets of protocols. I'm not intimately familiar with them, but right, every vehicle has a controller, obviously for the just for the speed control loop, but ultimately there is some. Let's say I have a backup camera in my vehicle, right? So why not use the existing infrastructure as part of that build? Like, why go with a separate controller and basically HMI combo that is on their own?
You mean, why have the automotive manufacturers done that? I mean,
Well,
FPD link is also very heavily used in camera systems on automotive as well. So it's not only a way of getting touchscreens to interface with the electronics that drive them, but it's also a way to get cameras back to electronics as well. Now, let me stress, there's a bunch of different technologies that are used in that space for that purpose, both for screens and for cameras. FPD link is not exclusively the ones that's used everywhere, but it is absolutely
gotcha.
used by, you know, in a lot of different places. So, but yeah, there's a multiple ways you can do that. I mean, some automotives, I think, use Ethernet-based cameras even for what they're doing in some cases, specialized, but I think it might even be Ethernet-based in some cases.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting application, right? Again, not something that you would see in a traditional factory. Are you able to talk to maybe some of the successes of the rollouts? How was it received? How was the process maybe of utilizing the product? Any early feedback from the manufacturer?
Yeah, I mean, I think the initial feedback has been good. The training probably that we have to do is on the cable. Let me see if I have that prop here. There we go. Okay, so this is the cable. This is just a short version of the cable. And it's one thing that's a little different about the cable is it's coaxial, right? So it's not your typical cables that you would see. I mean, it plugs in like a regular cable, but it is coaxial with, I think, 4 conductors on it. So we have to make sure they understand that this is a 2 gigahertz signal running through this cable, and they can't just slap together, you know, a cable on the bench on their own to replace the you know, to create one of a custom length or something. So, you know, that has been something, an education process we've had to supply. But in terms of the feedback we've gotten, they just love the fact that they now can very easily pendant mount the portion of their machine that they want pendant mounted, and protect back in the, you know, in the back somewhere, the PLC, and then have them still working just like they were a single piece of hardware with a single piece of software. So,
Gotcha. Out of curiosity, right? What kind of peripherals are controlled by, you know, the control system, ultimately the PLC, but interacted with by the HMI, right? Again, I'm not super familiar with that specific application in vertical, so I'm curious, you know, what kind of things are plugged in at the ambulance or fire truck level.
oh, you mean in terms of the IO, for instance?
Yes, yes. Like, what's the like? What kind of I/O are they using? I'm assuming there's a lot of maybe analog readings. Maybe there's different other protocols coming out of
Really
this.
high. There's a high level. One thing you'll find in automotive, and I'm not an automotive expert, but again, we do have a partner that is the automotive, or not automotive, mobile is what I'm talking about, not necessarily automotive. But one of the things you'll find in automotive you don't find much in industry is really high current PWM signals for driving really heavy duty gear, right? Really heavy duty actuators. I mean, you will literally, this partner of ours, and the name of the company is SafeLink. They're a Safe Fleet. Sorry. I can at least say that much. But anyway, they make this IO block that's like on a, I don't have one with me. Sorry, I was short on my props. But literally, it has a battery lug for the power. You know, we're not talking a 3-pin Phoenix connector. We're talking a battery lug is what you attach the power to, because they've got 20 amp outputs that they're driving, or 10 amp outputs that they're driving that are PWM signals to drive these big actuators. So there's that sort of thing that really separates the amount of oomph, if you will, to drive some of the output loads is just crazy.
I would be curious again if there is a white paper that is released on the case study. Obviously, like I said, to read what some of that I/O is driving. I have some thoughts and ideas, but I think it is definitely very interesting. So really appreciate that. Chuck, the other question that I do want to bring up while we still have you on the show is, of course, the emergence of AI, right? So I would say over the last 2-3 years,
Sure.
there's been a significant, I would say, uptick of interest in AI, both on the end user side for the OEMs, right? And everyone is talking about AI. What is your perspective right now? I would say as Chuck, but also as Horner Automation needs to also maybe face
Sure.
certain challenges. What are your thoughts on the AI front?
Right. So first of all, we have made a big investment in AI, or are making a big investment in AI, as most companies are and should be doing, right? I think this is not my quote. I think this is a Mark Cuban quote where he said that there's going to be two types of companies in the future: those that use AI and those that are out of business, that sort of thing. So, so it's good. We're all going to have to really adopt it and learn how to adopt it well. That's for sure. So, when I was talking to Phil Horner, asking him about his vision for the future, of course, AI is a heavy part of that. And he had a whole 5-part plan that has distinct sections to it, or distinct steps to it. But the one step that I thought was interesting, which is kind of step one now, is every PLC, anybody who uses PLCs or builds PLCs, every PLC really, from this point on, needs to be considered a data device. All right. So this little guy here that we're showing off at Automate, that's, $300. This is a very capable PLC, but this is just as much a data box as it is a PLC. So we're at the stage with AI today where we have to be getting serious, not as a manufacturer, but not as a OEM selling automation equipment, but as a company that's implementing automation. You need to be totally serious about digitizing your application, your process, your plant. That's the mode you need to be in right now. How do I get this thing digitized? Because without data, I can't do anything with AI in the future, at least not as much as I'd like to be able to do. So for now, we're just going to talk about phase one today. And that is, you got to think about every PLC you implement and every piece of gear that has intelligence. How is that also going to be a data box so you can digitize your plant?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think, again, I don't want to say all the end users understand that there needs to be a more data-driven approach, but certainly quite a few do. And then they start navigating the challenges of a lot of the obsolete systems. Again, we've talked a little bit about the protocols, but there is something to be said about, again, I don't want to say new again to follow Dave's comments, but ultimately, protocols that are a lot more suitable for extracting that information, right? And there's a lot of nuances. So truly appreciate the fact that you are releasing a controller that is data first and allows end users to communicate, extract, and ultimately utilize AI how they see fit, right? At the end of the day, they need to solve the problems for their own process. Dave, what are your thoughts?
I think that I want to get the acronym right, the FPD link. I think that is so much fun. I'm excited to go watch the screens that are daisy chained at Automate. I can absolutely see how in an ambulance or even like a fire truck or really any sort of large vehicle, being able to go put your brain, your PLC, your controller somewhere, and then go run multiple other screens would make a lot of sense and would be very helpful. As you were kind of describing it, Chuck, one of my thoughts was, as I was perusing the backlog of your YouTube videos, I saw one talking about using industrial controllers for home automation and for like Apple HomeKit, I think in particular. And so one of my thoughts is like, wow, I can actually almost envision someone probably going way overkill and turning a controller like that into the brain of their house, and then going and populating a whole bunch of screens across all of the different rooms of their house. Again, probably completely overkill, probably one of the more expensive ways you can go down that path. But I am fully expecting that to be at Vlad's house at some point in 2027 or 2028. Chuck, this has been. Go ahead, please.
Just real quick, we had an engineer back in 1994 who built a brand new house and put a LCD keypad-based operator interface, like 5 of them in his house. So that happened in like the mid-90s.
Wow, I think that is fantastic. But as I have had conversations with like my engineer friends, that has to be like the house that person is going to live in for the rest of their life. Because I could not imagine that would be an easy sell, right?
No.
Like almost anyone's going to walk in off the street and have no idea what it is. It may in fact only be worse if someone walks in off the street and knows what it is and is like, I'm not going to go get in the middle of someone else's code. I do love that. And I love hearing and seeing how people are taking kind of way overkill industrial technology and going and leveraging them in their home. That is super fun. Before we go ask you your final questions, I do just want to remind the listeners to go check out Horner Automation at Automate, which is booth 4303. Come find Vlad and I. We will be with Chuck and the Horner Automation group Wednesday morning through some period of Wednesday, going and covering that. And then stay tuned for the streams coming off of those conversations, in which we're going to go ask Chuck and some other folks a whole bunch more questions on these topics and more. Having said that, Chuck, this has been an absolutely awesome conversation. I want to get to ask you the final questions like we get to ask all of our guests. The first one is a predict the future question. I feel like we can go in so many different directions. I feel like we can go in so many different directions with this. But on your side, I guess, where do you see the future of controllers looking like over the course of the next 3 to 5 years? Are we going to see more modular controllers kind of spanning the price range? Are we going to see more of kind of the big 2 or 3 companies eat up even more of the controller market? Give us your thoughts on that, please.
I think there will be. Again, I think the part of it was people still remember what happened in the whole supply chain emergency of just a few short years ago. I think people are a little more hesitant to be too invested in one manufacturer. So I think they want to have a little bit, they want to explore their options a bit. So I think there's going to continue to be variety in the marketplace. And I think that's going to continue. I think with the push to digitize the factory, I think there's going to be a place in the market for smaller and smaller connected type PLCs and other intelligent products. So I think that will continue. I don't think we're going to be the only ones that have products like this in the market, although I think it's going to be an awesome product for us. So that's definitely something I see for sure. And then if you want me to just kind of comment on a couple other things that's going to affect us day-to-day application engineer guys that I used to be, I was at least one full time. One of the things my R&D manager said that is absolutely true, and that is that moving forward, security is going to be something that the application engineers are just going to really have to deal with, because what's happening is, like everything else, the industrial market is slow to adopt for good reason most of the time, because we need things that are reliable. But we've been slow to adopt security as a market, right? Well, there are mandates coming down now where it's not going to be an option. It's going to be, this is what must be implemented in these products. So us as manufacturers, we must implement those as specified. And then it's going to be up to the application engineer to implement these as they've been put into place by the manufacturers like Horner and others. So it's, the phone call of, well, I lost my password. Oh, what am I going to do? Ugh. If that's an issue in the past, it's going to be an important, necessary headache for application engineers to be dealing with over the next 10 years for sure. So that's one thing I wanted to mention, that's going to be a problem, or it's going to be an important problem that we need to deal with.
If I may ask a follow-up on that side, any frameworks that you would recommend, but also maybe some resources that you have used to get up to speed on the cybersecurity side? I know there's obviously like the ISA 62443. I think there's the NIST framework. Like anything else that you think is important to pay attention to when it comes to cybersecurity specifically?
In terms of the specific standards, I leave that to our very capable R&D manager, Mr. Ken Janata. So I go into a certain level of detail on things, and once something is picked and implemented, boom, I'm diving deep. But for now, I couldn't make a recommendation personally.
Okay, we'll make a note to maybe speak with him or get some feedback from him.
Absolutely.
At Automate.
Whether he'll be there on Wednesday, I'm not sure, but I'll make sure he's prepped on that question because he's got all those answers.
I love that. Vlad, I heard he was planning to be there on Wednesday, but now after listening to your questions, he's suddenly not going to be there on Wednesday. He is going to be called away for something important. But no, Chuck, I really appreciate that. I love the kind of inexpensive controller. I love the fact that it has Wi-Fi on it. And to your earlier comment, if you think of them as data boxes, kind of thinking of them as data boxes, I certainly see the need to go have more and many more of those out on the plant floor into the future. So thank you so much for that. Next question we want to ask you is for some career advice. So if someone is early to mid-career, maybe looking to make a change, what's the best piece of career advice you have for them?
Well, if they're early, I would say my advice always is go someplace you can learn and make a difference, right? So, and oftentimes, I mean, when we're getting fresh out of college, you know, our eyes are big. The big company is the sexy one. That's the one we're excited about because everybody's heard of it and our friends will be impressed. But you need to go someplace where you can be in a learning environment and where you can make a difference. That's, if you're early in your career, that's the most important thing. Because you can have the most meaningful work that way, and you can also find your passion. And my advice for the middle guys that are looking to make a move is make sure the most important thing that you're going to do in this middle move is make sure you're moving towards your passion, because work should be a joy, right? We all have our bad days, but work should be something we're excited about. And if we're partway through our career and we're making a change and we're not doing it because it's something we're passionate about, we're doing it because of some other reason, that's dangerous. Okay. Nothing wrong with experimenting a little bit, but make sure you move towards your passion. That's what I would say if you're in the middle of your career. That's critically important.
Absolutely. No, I think I think both of those are fantastic pieces of advice. Next up for you, Chuck, an interesting book or content recommendation. Do you have one of those for us today?
I do. And now last time I was on, this is the book I recommended. And just in 15 seconds, this is Dr. Kevin Lehman. He is an expert on marriage and relationships. Keep the family fires burning and the career will go like it needs to go. Okay. However, this is a second episode. And I'm going purely on the enjoyment level. Okay. So most of the time, is this mirrored or can you read that? Not sure.
It's mirrored, but the book is Slow Horses by
Sharon. There we go. Okay. Sorry, it's mirrored. I should have flipped that around. But anyway, that's purely on the enjoyment standpoint. Now, most of the time, I mean, I've got about 300 books on my audiobook, setup or whatever. Most of the time I'm reading, mysteries, espionage for enjoyment. And usually I read the book first and maybe it'll turn out to be a series or something. That's one that it was a series my daughter recommended. And wow, it was really good. And when I got to the end of the series, as it is so far on Apple TV Plus, I had to go get the books and just see if the books were even better. And the books are, the adaptations are fantastic and the books are even better. So that's one I would absolutely recommend, a series for sure.
High praise. Thank you for that. So I think I've seen season 1 of the television show. It's one of those, I'm not sure I realized it was a book, but season 1 was absolutely fantastic. If that is the sort of thing that you read, which is generally where you may find me on an off weekend. So that is fantastic. Both of those.
If you're watching the series, turn on the subtitles if you live in the United States, because we're going to pick up about 4 out of 5 words at best. So put the subtitles on.
I love that. Another fantastic recommendation. Thank you so much, Chuck. So up next, kind of an interesting idea or innovation. If Vlad comes to you and says, Chuck, I need something to go work on, what is the direction that you would give him?
Where would I send Vlad to go work on something? Oh my goodness. Goodness gracious. That one I wasn't fully prepared for. What would I have Vlad go do? My goodness. Maybe I would have Vlad. I know what I would do. I think what I would, if I was going to take advantage of Vlad, and who doesn't want to take advantage of Vlad, I would give him some of our gear, and I'd tell him to try and break it, and have him tell me what he doesn't like about it. All right. I want to find out from Vlad, who has all this experience with all these different manufacturers' products. I want to find out from him what his perspective is on a company that takes a different approach to control a lot of times, and see what he likes and what he doesn't like about it, so that we could feed that information back to our team.
It's a dangerous ask, but appreciate it, Chuck.
It is a terribly dangerous ask. A dangerous ask for a man who asks dangerous questions. This has been fantastic, Chuck. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us once again. Last question for you is, how can our listeners help? Who should reach out? Who should connect with you at Automate or LinkedIn or any of these other places?
Sure. So first of all, in general, to learn more about Horner, go to www.hornerautomation.com. Okay, that's our website. To see the variety of YouTube videos that we have, many of which are training related that we've talked about today, you can go to our Horner APG YouTube channel. Now, it's Horner APG because that's our official name of our division, and that includes both of our automation and our lighting divisions, among other things. So Horner APG YouTube channel. We're active on LinkedIn, so we've got that information as well. And if you're interested in, I don't know specifically about any openings we currently have, but if you are one of these people that is young and curious and you're interested in automation, don't hesitate to check us out. And we might have an opening in our tech support group as an entry-level position. We might have an opening in our engineering team, maybe as an intern, or maybe there's a bigger opening available. So we are a company that is very passionate about what we do. We have owners that are very supportive, and it's a great place to work. So if you're interested in automation and getting in on, that sort of at the OEM level, as Vlad would say, check us out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Chuck. I have dropped links to the Horner Automation website, the YouTube channel, and the LinkedIn page. If you guys are watching on LinkedIn, you can also go connect with Chuck, and all of those links will be in on the LinkedIn event. Chuck, thank you so much. I am super excited to go continue this conversation at Automate. One last reminder for our listeners, if you guys have made it this far, Wednesday morning, Vlad and I will be with Chuck and the other Horner Automation folks, Automate, which is booth 4303. And also, feel free to go and visit Chuck and everyone else, not just Wednesday morning. Vlad and I will be floating around over the course of Automate, so please come say hi to all of us. And if you guys have made it this far, you're absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, make sure you're connected with Chuck and following Horner. Make sure you're following Manufacturing Hub and Vlad and myself. If you made it this far on YouTube or are listening on podcast format, rate us 5 stars, hit the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button, follow along for live shows and more. Until next